Here we go. Okay, so some introductions to ourselves. I'm Molly Hogg from CAfS, and I'm going to be your chair for today. I'm also joined by Andrew Northcott and Tina Holt from the energy team within CAfS, and they're going to be giving you the presentations. And we're also very pleased to be joined by Paul Martyn today from Ambleside. He's from Ambleside Action for a Future, and he's going to be telling you about his experience and the training he's undertaken and the work that the group are doing within Ambleside around home energy efficiency. So just looking at the agenda for this evening, just straight after this, I'll be launching the first poll. We'll then be moving on to Andrew's presentation, and Andrew will be telling you about the energy services that are available from CAfS. We'll then be hearing from Paul, who will be telling you the things I've just explained. And then on to Tina, who will be giving an overview of the funding that's available and some things to bear in mind if you're considering moving forward with any of that. It's then back to me with the follow-ups and the second poll, and then we'll be moving on to a Q&A session for any of those questions that we haven't managed to answer already. Aiming to close around 7 o'clock, and hopefully we'll stick to time. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to launch the first poll. So all you need to do, there'll be 3 questions on this first one, and all you need to do is just tick the box. And then afterwards, I'll show you the results. So hopefully, can everyone see that poll now? Or if anyone can't see the poll, put a message in the chat. So the questions are, how confident are you about making energy efficiency improvements to your home? How clear are you on the funding that's available and how to access it? And the third question, how clear are you on the things that you need to consider when you're getting the work done? We've got 13 people have voted. It's going up. Oh, lovely, very quick now. Give it a little bit longer for anyone else to vote. Might be some people struggling to make their minds up. Okay, 10 more seconds for the last people. Okay, and I'm going to close the poll now. Now, hopefully I should be able to share results. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you can see that now. So on the first question, how confident are you about making energy efficiency improvements? The majority are fairly unconfident, which I guess is why you're here today. And so hopefully we'll be able to give you a bit more confidence on how to go about it. How clear are you about the funding available? Again, the majority are fairly unclear. And similarly, on the third one, how clear are you on what you need to consider? Again, fairly unclear. So, okay, that's a starting point. That's quite a challenge for us today. So hopefully by the end of it, when we rerun this poll at the end, hopefully that will, the balance of that will have shifted slightly. Fingers crossed it doesn't. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that now. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andrew, please.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen so you can see the presentation that I've got. So there's a few slides and hopefully that's I thought I'd start the presentation by outlining our premium sort of flagship service, Cold to Cozy Homes, which is the free service available. So that's currently based on energy saving advice by telephone, although we hope to resume real visits as soon as it's safe and possible to do so practically. But it does provide a service that's Cumbria-wide, working in collaboration and partnership with all the local authorities across Cumbria. We'll just go on to the next slide. So say it's entirely free service. You don't need to apply for funding or anything. You just come through to CAfS by phone or online, and we check the eligibility, and then one of our advisors will make a phone call or arrange for a phone call with you that offers free energy advice across a range of things. So around the house, energy saving, tariffs, behavioural changes that you can make yourself, use of heating, and all sorts of other things. And then the additional feature that Cold & Cosy Homes Cumbria has is the final point there, that you can get draft proofing installed if it's suitable, if it's required. So if there's a need for this draft proofing, then that gets professionally fitted. And again, that's subject to a COVID safe check, and it's all done in a COVID safe way. Okay, so just moving on to the next slide there, just outlines some of the features that I've described that the home energy advice can offer. Often quite a lot of confusion can arise about use of thermostats and room thermostats and radiator thermostats, and the other heating controls at the boiler. But it can also deal with dampness and ventilation and advice on that, and as I said, tariffs. But then there's also advice about the other services and other help available, such as a warm home discount, but also things like the priority services register, income maximisation, and other schemes that we can refer on to, as well as referring on to other measures, so larger measures that can be installed. So that's wider schemes like the Eco3, so government schemes, energy company funded schemes that can provide wall insulation and other large measures. Okay. So as I said, it's Cumbria wide. It's been going for a few years, but we had a big relaunch in September this year. We've seen, we've been going for about a year and a half. We've actually advised 600 homes through the scheme, either with advice visits or the new telephone advice service. And there's funding available for another 800 of the advice visits or calls. So it's 800 more places. Okay, and then the draft proofing, as I say, is provided if it's required, and that's available whether you own your home or you're privately renting your home, though that element, the draft proofing, is not available for social housing tenants. Okay. So who's eligible? Just broadly there is a breakdown, but it's based on a vulnerability criteria, an age criteria, an income criteria, being in receipt of benefits, health and disability. Did I mention that? And also if you're actually registered on the priority services register already with your electricity provider or other providers, priority services registers. Okay, so full details on that is all on the website, which we've got information of later. Okay, and who does it? Well, we do. So we provide it's either CAfS staff that provide it or some of our trusted contractors, and they provide the advice, visits and calls. And then the installations are provided by one or more draft proofing installers that are contracted to CAfS. And we work in partnership with the LEAP service, so that's the local energy advice partnership, and they help arrange the some of the visits and check the eligibility, and they also provide the systems that we use. Okay. So just to summarize the Cold & Cosy scheme, information is available on the website, so there it is, cozyhomes.org.uk. And that links directly through to the CAfS website. So all the information is actually held on the CAfS website. So you can see it just by going through to the CAfS website directly, but that's also our main address there. And also you can call us on the number there. Okay. And just a final point that if you know somebody who could apply or you could apply on their behalf, then you can do that via the website as well. So we're really after spreading the word around Cumbria to reach people who might otherwise not have heard of the scheme. Okay, so that's Cold & Cosy Homes Cumbria. And then I'm just going to move on and talk about some of the paid services which we provide. I'll start with thermal imaging, and then I'll describe in a little bit more detail the Home Retrofit Planner, which is our comprehensive energy audit tool. And then I'm going to just touch on some of the training that we provide as well. So opportunities there to learn more about retrofitting and saving energy. So the thermal imaging service, I've been involved with this at CAfS for about 7 years. I know some of you have on the webinar benefited from the service, and it's really useful thermal imaging for particularly detecting issues around missing insulation and draft. So it's particularly good if you've had some work done and you want to verify what the problems are, or if you've just can't get to the bottom of why a certain room is drafty or cold, and you want to sort of pinpoint if there's find what it is. And then thermal imaging is really good because it brings to life the thermal anomalies. You've got a graphical representation, you've got something, you've got a picture you can show an installer, a contractor. You sort of, well, I'll show you a few examples in a moment, but it's it visualizes the heat loss, so it's particularly helpful in that respect. That's just summarizing those main points there. It's very good when if you're having work done and you want to check its progress before the plasterboard goes back on or it gets hidden, covered up. It's quite good to go in and check what's going on. And you can, of course, buy these little add-ons for smartphone, plug in and work on a smartphone and iPhones, and they're not too expensive. And that can be quite good at sort of seeing things yourself if you want to be hands-on. One of the key things about thermal imaging now is to get the conditions right for thermography. So it's getting the right sort of temperature differential across the building between inside and outside. And it's also about interpreting the results. So it's understanding where the heat is, understanding heat capacity, understanding the problems that can arise, like reflections and emissivity. So the amount of heat that comes off different surfaces is different depending on the nature of the surface. So it's quite a little bit, well, it's quite a lot of knowledge there required by the thermographer. So when the expert comes out, they'll be able to interpret those images for you. So it's really good. I thought there's a few more images to show you the sort of things that we see with the thermal camera. Really good at finding the gaps in loft insulation. So somebody there in the top picture there has not quite put the insulation up to the edge there, so you're able to sort of think, oh, okay. And you can sort of, you've got a laser pointer and you can measure that and see, well, actually it's 1/10 of the ceiling, so I'm losing heat there. And you can then see the temperatures in the blue there. You know, you're down to sort of 12 degrees, 13 degrees, as opposed to the rest of the ceiling, which is just looking at the sorry, the battery's gone on my mouse, so that's an unfortunate point for that to happen. Bring it back to life. So you see on a temperature scale there is really useful. Again, floorboards here are gaps there with the cold air coming through. So this is where we're seeing drafts, particularly in this case on the lower screen around the edge with the skirting board, and suspended floors, wooden floors are prone to draft. So it's really helpful if you actually got the sealant or the wood filler and you can actually work with the thermal camera and fill the gaps as you go along. And also just going back up to that one above, you see the blue comes down the back. This is a dot and dab plasterboard wall, and you can see the effect of the cold air just dropping down behind the plasterboard there. Dot and dab's not brilliant way of doing things, and you can see the problems you got there. Okay, so also really good for loft hatches, extractor fans, pipes, cables, wherever you've got any gaps in the thermal envelope. So underneath the kitchen units, especially the kitchen sink, a lot of drafts around there. So really helpful for finding things like that. Okay. extractor fan there, for example. If you've got an extractor like this, then it doesn't have a closing flap, then that's one to sort out and swap for one that closes with a proper iris or flaps itself, so to block the cold air. And most extractor fans don't seem to have that, so it's basically a hole in the wall, even when it's off. So you can see with this one, 5.4 degrees is the temperature of the air coming through the extractor fan. This extractor fan is not on. So that's the sort of effect compared to the surrounding temperatures of about 16 degrees. So it's just like leaving the window open. So that's something you can do. If you've got fans like that, then by all means get a thermal imaging assessment from us, but you can make a move on some of those things straight away, because it's so many houses we see extractor fans like this with the cold air coming through, and also the cold air leaking around. You see what it says SP3 here. So you've got cold air coming around the outside of the fan as well. Okay. But really finding major problems arises as well. So this was a retrofit which was done on a Victorian property. It's a set of flats, and they put sort of plasterboard walls in and ceilings, and thought, oh, it's really important it breathes. So they let ventilation come into the gap between the plasterboard and the original Victorian building. It's basically a plasterboard house within a cold space with cold air blowing behind. Particularly noticeable was the ceiling of this house. Over a large area, you're sort of seeing 14 degrees. It was like a quarter to a third of the ceiling area in the living room. So you can see how that's comparing with 20 degrees elsewhere. So these are sort of like major issues that it does sort of find that need some sort of fix to make the property a little bit warmer. And I think as just on draft proofing, how important it is to use the thermal imaging, particularly with the prevailing wind. So this is a prevailing wind on a high altitude property in Cumbria, and the door was fitted within the last 6 or 7 months. So it was clearly a case where the homeowner could feel confident to ring up the installer and say, hey, come back, and you can come back and have a look at this door because I've got the evidence that it's just not doing its job properly. So, you know, and an installer will be straight back, well, could be straight back and make some adjustments. And in that case, I think I heard that it was fixed quite quickly. Okay, so thermal imaging, just to summarize, is available from CAfS from £180. It's a service is tailored to what you need, type of property and your budget. So we can provide a detailed report on the findings, then the interpretation, or if you want a more streamlined service at a lower cost, then we can provide that without that scheme. And you can get involved as well normally. So with the thermal imaging, you can be there, not currently with COVID safe working, but normally you can be hands-on with the camera and see the results like live as it's happening and direct the thermographer around your house to the areas that you feel are of concern to you. It usually takes place in the colder months of the year. November through to March is ideal. The low sunshine months are perfect. December and January are particularly good. Quite often early in the morning before the sun's up. Early sunrises can throw it and can spoil the imagery. So there are plenty of days when there's no sun, as you're aware. So it works quite well. If it's very windy or very wet, it also doesn't work. So it is weather dependent, and it does require that temperature differential of 10 degrees for sufficient time between inside and out for it to work properly. Okay, so I'll just move on to the home retrofit planner. So this is, we've been providing the service for about 3 years or so, but now we're working with the new scheme new service, which is called the Home Retrofit Plan, and this is produced, and we work in partnership with the Carbon Co-op, which are a sister organisation very similar to ourselves, based in Manchester, and they sort of franchise the scheme, the service, to organisations like ourselves. Okay, so what does it mean? Well, it's fundamentally an energy audit tool, but it provides an analysis of what the heat loss is in your home currently, and then builds in a number of different retrofit scenarios. So you can see the potential impact of doing certain things like floor insulation or wall insulation, or replacing certain windows or all the windows, and replacing the internal door to the garage or the back door, putting a new loft hatch in, draft proofing, extensive draft proofing, an air source heat pump, a whole range of retrofit options. And we tend to work out the scenarios based on, well, the first scenario is typically a measure of, well, we apply basic things, so the quick things, so the things you might do before the winter sets in. So some quick draft proofing, getting rid of those final halogen lights if they exist, or tungsten lights, which we still sometimes find, and maybe insulating the back of the garage door, or doing some quick fixes. But then scenario 2 is typically the things that we talk about and explore in the discussion that we have with you as part of the audit process, and it would be the things that you're considering. So it could be the underfloor insulation and a particular wall that you want to insulate. So they're maybe the things that you're considering, and then we talk maybe the air source heat pump you're thinking of, or maybe we'll push that into scenario 3. And the scenario 3, we tend to sort of put everything on so that you could see the maximum potential of the property and how efficient that could become. Okay, so it's more than just an energy performance certificate. It uses some of the measurements that you would do to do an EPC, but it's much more sophisticated, and it looks at what your priorities are as a client for what you want to achieve, and things like what temperatures you have your house at now, health conditions, air quality, even light coming into the room, and all those many different things are factored in. Okay. So the stages when having an audit with us is a pre-visit. So we'll discuss the what you want to achieve, and considerations, any drawings you have, but considerations like planning and building approvals, etc. So that's ahead of the main part of the audit. And then the second stage, currently we do, and it's working really well, this, but we do it by a Zoom call or Teams call or by phone, but ideally in a video conference, so that we can understand priorities, motivations, preferences, any plans, timescale, budget. So we're actually talking with you about what you want to achieve, and make a lot of notes on that. And then the third stage, a crucial bit, is a building assessment, and we do a visual inspection of the property's condition, and then measure everything. So the whole house is measured, all the dimensions, room dimensions, all the windows, doors, wall thicknesses, etc. So that all comes into 4 in a model. We're in point number 4 there. We build that into an energy model for the home, and then we build those scenarios. And then what you get as a client is a home retrofit planner report, and that's quite substantial. And it also, as well as breaking down the different scenarios, I'll just go back and show you the house picture there. It shows you where scenario 2, it shows you the current situation, so what the heat loss is through the main elements, what it is currently and what it is for the different scenarios. So that's one of the most graphical ways of seeing the impact of the floor insulation, etc. And then each one is costed, and there's guidance on how to go about and what considerations you should make when looking at each of the retrofit options. And then final stage is a follow-up consultation, so you get an opportunity to explore with us the recommendations or ask any questions. So
got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah,
Andy.
That's the retrofit planner. Thank you. And they start from £600. And that's hopefully, yes, also from the new year, we're hoping to have the heat pump advice built in, so it's going to have more detail about heat pumps, so how appropriate the heat pump would be, and also what sizing a heat pump, and whether you'd need bigger radiators or other factors like that. Okay, So just very quickly finishing off on training courses. The two sort of ones I wanted to touch on were the retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency, which we've run in the past and would hope to run again sometime in the future. And this is principally aimed at professionals, but also homeowners that want to get hands-on with the detail of energy use, measuring energy use, analysing the heat loss, performance of building fabric, etc. So these were traditionally day courses, so there were 7 days, although we've run them over webinars more recently and on in evening classes. Okay. And finally, just the other courses that we provide is just going back to the cold to cozy homes is the energy champion training. So this is building up the awareness in the within professionals, but also active volunteers in the community, and building up that awareness of the cold to cozy home service and how to go about referring people to the scheme. So that's one that we've been running by webinar. We have about 80 energy champions or so far across Cumbria, helping us build the cold to cozy home service. Just finally, before doing all of those things, do consider your tariffs, especially at the moment. We're all using a little bit more energy. There's 2 of us at home, the kettle on and off all day. So do consider your tariff, and that's a service we provide, and you can access that at the CAfS website. So we've got our own switching service there using the energy shop. So there's detail of that on our website. Okay, that's it from me.
Lovely, thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you. There's been a few questions that have come in while you've been speaking, so perhaps now you might be able to have a look at those while we move on to Paul. Just to remind people that if Tina's answered one of the questions, and you'll find your answered question under the other tab called Answered, and just in case you're wondering where your question's gone. Okay, lovely, thank you. Andrew, if you could stop sharing your screen,
sorry, yeah.
please. And then we will, lovely, thank you. And over to you, Paul.
Hi, my name's Paul Martyn. I'm actually one of my sidelines is doing some of the draft proofing installations for CAfS. I've been doing that for a bit over a year now, I think. I first started doing the draft proofing quite a few years ago. I started with my own house, and when I bought my house, I could feel that I could feel I needed to do some work on keeping it a bit warmer. I was spending a lot of money on the energy, so it was a solid wall house. And looking into that, I found that it just wasn't just a case of throwing a little bit of insulation on the walls, because there were a lot of problems with solid wall houses. So that started me on a track that I've been going on ever since. I've done a bit of training since then. One of the first things I did was the Zero Carbon Britain training with CAT down in Wales, and that was was very interesting, and looking at the possibilities of how we can reduce our energy use. And I've done 2 or 3 trainings via CAfS at Kendall College. I've done the building fabrics, which is looking at lime plasters on the solid slate houses in Cumbria. So it's really interesting. If you can get another shot at that, if Andrew's got that coming up again, it's a good one to look at. I've done the retrofitting for energy efficiency, which was very good, very informative. And the other one I've just recently done the via CAfS again. I've done the energy assessor program to help us with our work, which I'm started now about 2 years ago. I'm living in Ambleside now, or near Ambleside, and we started a local group called Ambleside Action for a Future to try and work towards mitigating against the climate breakdown that we have now. So with that, we got quite a few people coming into the group, and it's been building ever since. We have probably I think we have about 120 members now, So it's doing quite well. And out of that, we developed a group called A to Z, which is Ambleside to Zero carbon, with an aim of trying to do what we could to bring Ambleside down to lower its carbon emissions for the whole of the town, but not just for Ambleside really. It was for the whole district. We have focused mainly on Ambleside because we're not a big group, and it takes quite a bit of work just to keep to that. And so out of the A to Z group, we developed another 4 focuses, and one was transport, which is looking at more sustainable transport around the area and in Ambleside, and maybe we have a renewable energy team, which is looking at the possibility of bringing more renewable energy, photovoltaic cells into Ambleside, and we're working on that currently, and it's ongoing. We've been developing a carbon footprinting tool with the help of Lancaster University, I think it is. We're developing that. That's coming through now. We're just very soon going to start trialing that amongst ourselves before we take it out into the wider group. And then we have the one that I'm getting to, which is the warmer home, what we call the warmer homes group, with the idea of helping people to make their homes a little bit more energy efficient, a little bit cozier. And so what we're doing with that, we have a plan, we have a application and a grant to get funding to buy a thermal imaging camera, which Andrew's been talking about that earlier on. We have half of the funding. We had to split it into 2, so we were just waiting. Early December we'll get the funding hopefully get the funding for the second half to pay for the camera. And then we will we'll be offering a service of doing the thermal imaging. At the present time with the current COVID, we'll only be offering it for outside the houses until we get a clear sort of go ahead, which I hope will be in the new year at some stage. So we're going to be doing thermal imaging, doing reports, and showing basically where at the moment where you're losing heat from the outside of your house coming through. You'll be able to see, and we'll be offering that as a free service to local people. Along with that, there'll be more energy advice. We'll be talking to people about other options like the draft proofing, which I've been doing. So I've got a few bit of knowledge on that, and we'll also be working on we have 2 or 3, I think, champions, cold to cozy champions within our group as well. So they are actually spreading the word around as well. So we'll be referring people that are able to qualify. We'll be referring them through the CAfS to the cold and cozy group. So that is a bit of what we're up to. Hopefully, at the moment, we're still waiting for the camera. We have one that we can borrow to get going, and we will be hopefully getting on with it with more energy in the new year. And I'm not sure if there's anything else I can say about that at the moment. So.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Paul. That was really interesting to hear. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to Tina.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Molly. So I'm going to be talking briefly about several of the funding schemes that are currently available. And this is really just a whistle-stop tour through some of these funding schemes because there's an awful lot of detail in there, and I'm just going to touch on the basics. So I'll start with, hang on, I'm having some trouble getting through there. Just a moment. Okay, so the current funding schemes, now the newest one that you may have heard about in the news recently is the Green Homes Grant. And the key points to remember about this one are that there are different kinds of different ways of getting that Green Homes grant. So if you are not on benefits, you will need to pay a certain amount towards the cost of the work. But if you are on benefits, you can get up to £10,000 worth of work done. If you're not on benefits, then you can get up to £5,000, but you need to top up a third of that. And there's also something called the local authority delivery, which is worth keeping an eye on, because that is a slightly different version of this grant where the local authority gets involved. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Then you may also have heard of the ECO, the Energy Company Obligation, and that is a scheme that's been running for several years now. It's a national scheme. You have to be on certain benefits to qualify for these energy efficiency measures, heating, insulation, and so on. And there is also a local authority option to widen the criteria. So in parts of Cumbria, the local authority has done that and offers an EcoFlex scheme, which catches a few people that wouldn't be eligible for eco, but in these circumstances, they will meet the new EcoFlex criteria. And then finally, the Renewable Heat Incentive, which is a national scheme, and it's been running for several years, and you may well have heard of that. So just to give you a quick intro to each of these schemes, the RHI, or the Domestic Renewable Heat Incentive, covers biomass boilers, solar hot water, and certain kinds of heat pumps. And you get payments for 7 years after the installation based on the amount of renewable heat that your system will generate. It works whether you're a homeowner or you have a private or social landlord. So there are options for all of those now. New builds are not normally eligible, except if you're doing a self-build. And finally, one of the really key important things is that you need to use an MCS accredited installer. And there's information on the government website there, and I've put the link there about that. So moving on to the ECO, the Energy Company Obligation. Also, the ECO is a national scheme, and the eligibility criteria are based on different benefits that people can qualify for. There's no end date set, but the measures do change over time. So the detail changes from year to year. And you access this scheme via eco installers or your energy company, or you can ask the local authority. And some of the local authorities have quite a lot of information on their websites, others less so. But you can look for these installers, and they all tell you whether they do eco or not. And your energy company is often a place where you can start to ask about this. If you don't qualify for eco, but you might meet, you're nearly there, if you like, you can look on your local authority website. And for example, Eden District Council has all sorts of information about eco. They call it the Warm Homes Eden scheme, and they have a statement with lots of detail about who can qualify, what kind of properties they're trying to upgrade, and that kind of thing. So it's well worth having a look at that. And South Lakes has an EcoFlex scheme, as does Carlisle City Council. We're hoping that maybe some of the others will come on board eventually. So for the energy company obligation, you can get these improvements to your home if you claim certain benefits and live in private housing, own your own home, or rent from a private landlord. And in some cases, if you live in social housing as well. And you can get help with different kinds of insulation, loft, cavity walls, perhaps external wall insulation, or replacing and repairing boilers or upgrades to heating. And it's just the devil's in the detail really with eco. It often depends on having an assessment done of your house, and then they look to see how much carbon can be saved. So it's hard to predict what you can get, but you have to have an assessment, and they tell you what they can do for you. Finally, the Green Homes Grant. This is the newest government scheme, and there again it divides into two different aspects of this grant. So starting with the individual homeowners, there is a voucher scheme. and that runs now to the 31st of March 2022. It was going to be finishing in 2021, 31st of March, which was a terribly tight timescale, and there was a lot of concern around that, so it's been extended. In this scheme, the householder is responsible for correctly using the scheme in order to claim the voucher and get the money back. If you don't jump through all the hoops correctly, if you don't follow all the instructions, then you could get to a situation where at the end of the day, you have to pay the money and you don't get the voucher, and you can't claim it. So it's really, really important, if you take away nothing else from this talk, but you're thinking of using the Green Homes Grant, what I've written there in red, 28 pages of terms and conditions which define the scheme and how to make a successful claim. And I can't go into the detail of all of that, but it's really crucial. I would say print all the 28 pages off and go through it with a fine-tooth comb, because how to claim your grant, how to be eligible, every single thing you have to do to get that grant is in those terms and conditions. And that is the most single important thing about the Green Homes Grant voucher scheme, is make sure you absolutely understand what's in the terms and conditions. They tell you what to do. And you can get those from the Simple Energy Advice website, and the link is there. The other aspect of the Green Homes Grant scheme is called the LAD, the Local Authority Delivery. And this is where a local authority gets involved. And a bit like the EcoFlex, the local authority can adjust the criteria slightly to focus on the kind of properties they really want to focus on in their area. And they can broaden the criteria so that people who are on low incomes but not low enough to get other help can get help with this scheme. So Eden District Council has already done this. They've set a wider criteria. They're working with a chosen supplier or suppliers. In the case of Eden, they've gone with E.ON. And there are different rounds to the Green Homes Grant LAD scheme. So we're on round 1A now. 1B is starting fairly soon. Applications are open. And then 2 will be further into the future. So there's opportunity and scope for other councils in Cumbria to get involved with the Green Homes Grant LAD scheme. And that gives householders a bit of extra protection really, or guidance, or some sort of support, because they're doing this not on their own, but with others in the area in conjunction with the local authority. So a bit more about the voucher schemes for people who are just doing that without the support of the local authority. The general scheme is for people who, you could be on any income at all, and your voucher will cover 2/3 of the cost up to a value of £7,500, where the grant will cover £5,000 per property. If you want to do more work, then you have to pay the extra. And for the low income scheme, for people on low incomes, the vouchers can cover 100% of the cost up to a maximum of £10,000. But again, if you want £12,000 worth of work done, you'll have to pay the extra £2,000. And you must be in receipt of certain benefits to qualify, and landlords can't apply for that particular voucher. Now, it's worth thinking about whether you can combine these 3 schemes, and to some degree you can. So for example, you might be able to use the Green Homes Grant for one measure and Eco for another measure. If you understand the 2 schemes and exactly what measures they each offer, that could work out quite well. You can get the Green Homes Grant for the upfront cost of certain measures where you get the renewable heat incentive, but the renewable heat incentive payment would then be reduced accordingly. So it's cost neutral in the end, but that's still beneficial for people who haven't got the money to put down now to get, say, a biomass boiler. They can use the Green Homes Grant to get the boiler, but they get less renewable heat incentive payments as a result afterwards. Also, one other thing just to mention, and this is in the terms and conditions for the Green Homes Grant, is that you need 1 voucher per measure, not 1 voucher for a group of measures. So you just need to really understand those terms and conditions. There's a long list of measures that can be covered. I'm not going to go into lots of detail, but there are primary measures that you have to have done if you're going to have secondary measures done as well. And I won't read through the list, but that's the full list there. You really need impartial advice first before you start, because the process doesn't tell you what's right for your house. It just tells you what you can have. So it's quite a long process. And as you can see, you start by looking for advice, you get quotes, you do all these bits, you apply for your voucher, you get your voucher, you arrange for the work, they do the work, you get the work signed off, you have to then redeem your voucher, the claim gets approved, you hope, and then finally the payment is made and the government makes the payment. So it's quite a process to get through. And the installers, and this is really important, they must have the right qualifications, the overall installer or even the subcontractors, and you need to make sure that that is done correctly. And the installers cannot apply for the scheme on the householder's behalf. This is what scams are going on. They're coming and saying, we can do this for you, we can apply for you. That isn't true. There are already scams going on, we've heard about in Cumbria. So that's what you need to know. And then the other really important thing before you think about any grant for anything ever is, what's the right thing for my house? And to get, in some cases, if you're doing a lot of work, get independent advice. And the example that I would give here is two contrasting properties. One is a large stone farmhouse, only has a bit of loft insulation and a broken oil boiler, and somebody wants to put in an air source heat pump and replace the single glazing with double or triple glazing. Now, without insulating that building properly, the heat pump will not heat the building at all. But in another property, say a park home with electric heaters, if you put in the air source heat pump and you properly insulate the roof and floor and walls and you draft proof, you could end up with a nice warm home that's cheaper to heat. So right thing in the right place is what you need to be aiming for. Quality is really essential. Look for damp issues to sort out in advance. Some things are more risky, and install the right thing in the right place. So potential issues, and this is just an absolute touching on just a few examples. With any kind of wall insulation, you do need to make sure you've got someone you've got some advice from somewhere that is pointing you in the right direction and giving you good design advice, understanding how moisture moves in a building and all of that. You need just good solid advice before you do those things. In terms of other forms of insulation under the floor, think about the joists, ask questions. You need to know this information. Same with flat roofs, same with room in the roof. It all goes back to what Andrew was saying earlier about getting the right advice, getting an in-depth assessment of a house if you're doing quite a lot of different insulation. And finally, heating systems and that kind of thing. Again, make sure it's the right thing for your situation and for your property and for your lifestyle. You may find that you're taking on too much technology sometimes when you don't need as much, and you could put that money into something else. So getting that balance is really important. And so in summary, we suggest do take independent advice if you're planning to spend quite a lot of money on improving your home. Some things need more advice than others, particularly internal insulation of different kinds. And we would just say, start from a really good starting point. Start from knowing what you really need to do. So that's all that I'm going to say on that one. I think I've rattled through it fairly quickly. And I'm expecting there's going to be a few questions about that.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tina. And just to re-emphasise what Tina said, that the Green Homes Grant has been extended. So fingers crossed that will give a bit more time to iron out some of the teething trouble that people have had with that, and more time to think about it properly.
And actually, the other thing that's really critical following on from that, Molly, is that there's been a real shortage of installers. And I think that's one of the reasons that they've extended the scheme. It's been so difficult for us in Cumbria, for people looking out for installers. It's been really challenging. And the hope is that giving a longer time frame gives a chance for more installers to get set up. So if you've looked at the Simple Energy Advice website and you've tried to find an installer in this area, you've had to extend your search quite widely to find people from outside of the area who are prepared to come and work in the area. And that's a known challenge at the moment.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen again, just bear with me for 2 seconds. Okay, can you see that now? Yeah, lovely. So this is just if you wanted to follow up on anything that you've heard today. So if you're interested in the CAfS energy services that Andrew talked about, or if you want to apply for the Cold to Cozy Home services, you can do that directly via the website or via the phone number that Andrew put on his slide. And if you're interested in any CAfS training events, I don't think we've got any that are open advertised at the moment, but as I said at the start, we'll be interested in knowing what the demand is so we can then plan to meet that demand. And if you are interested in our general activities, we have a newsletter. So there's a link at the bottom of our homepage for you to sign up to the newsletter. Hopefully we'll be able to share these slides and a recording of this webinar. My colleague Kieran is on the call. Kieran, I don't know whether you might be able to put into the chat how we're going to share that. That would be really helpful. So I've just lost the chat. I'm going to stop screen sharing now because I've lost my view of things. Okay, that's better. Okay, lovely. So I've now got some further polls. So the first one you'll see will just be a repeat of the questions at the beginning, so we can see whether we've helped at all in any of those areas where you said you felt unclear. And then there's a couple of other questions about your kind of interest in pursuing various options. So I'm going to launch the first one now. Wait for a second. Okay, there we go. So it's exactly the same questions, but whether our webinar has made any difference. And I've got my fingers crossed here. Oh, the first person said somewhat confident and fairly clear. That's really encouraging. No pressure, anybody. You have to be honest. Lovely. I'm about halfway now. It's going up. Okay. I'll just give it another 10 seconds for people to finish. Lovely. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and I will share that one with you. So that is really encouraging. Most people now are somewhat confident about how to go about it and fairly clear about the funding available and fairly clear about what they need to consider before getting the work done. So I'm really pleased, at least we've helped in those respects. That's great. Stop sharing that now and just launch the next one, which is about whether you're likely to access the support from the Cold to Cozy Homes, the free support, whether you're likely to apply for the Green Homes Grant, and whether you're likely to apply for any of the other funding. I'm just going to mention while this is coming in, and we've also got a feedback form. We'd be really grateful if you could complete. I'm going to stick it in the chat, the link to it. Okay, that's gone in the chat. So let's have a look at 5 more seconds on this second poll. Okay, I'm going to end now. So let's have a look at the results on that one. So fairly even spread on who might apply for the free support, and the most is very likely. So that's good. We'll look forward to hearing from you. Most people not likely to apply for the Green Homes Grant, but actually it's about balanced actually between some that were fairly likely and very likely. So that's about half and half. And then applying for other funding, again, a balance between some will and some won't. Okay, and then we've got one last poll, if you'll bear with me for a second, and this should be fairly quick. So this is, would you be interested in the Energy Champion training if we were to continue offering that? And would you be interested in home energy performance training? So that's the more detailed training. really helpful to get this feedback from you so we can plan what we can offer. Okay, we're nearly there on this one. Can you just give it 5 more seconds? Okay, so mostly no, some maybes. So we'll maybe have to think about what we might offer on that one. That's really helpful, thank you. So as I said, I've put in the chat the link if you could fill in the feedback form for us. Also, Paul has asked that I share CAfS email address, which I'm just going to copy in and share with everybody if you wanted to contact CAfS. And have we got any more questions, any unanswered questions? I know that Andrew and Tina have been busy answering questions. We've got one more here from Andrew. I've been put off by the complexity described and the difficulty of finding installers. So I suppose it's a comment rather than a question. Yes, that's, yes.
But
That's
what I would
understandable.
say is that situation may improve over time, and we've got a year and a bit until March the 31st. So the hope is that that will become clearer. And also, if the local authorities take on the LAD schemes across Cumbria or across more of Cumbria, then that opens it up to people who might be eligible for the local LAD scheme. And that could be a simpler way of doing it, because the local authority would have an installer already as a partner, and then other people could just join in with that. So I say, you know, it's not for everyone, but it might be it might become clearer and more straightforward to access.
Thank you, Tina. Is there any more questions from anybody? We've got some time if anybody wanted to ask anything. While we're just waiting to see if there are any more, I'm just going to share my screen again for the follow-up contact details in case anybody wanted to note those down. There we go, that's up there. Okay, have a look. We haven't got any more questions coming in. I think people are probably starting to leave now. Let's see. Oh, yep, we've got another question from David and Barbara. Is Coal-to-Cozy unique to Cumbria? Question for you, Andrew.
Yes, in that it is the only scheme that's worked in collaboration with all the authorities, all the local authorities. So they help advise us on how to deploy it in their areas, and we push them about marketing it, and it adds a lot of credibility having them on board. And trust as well, so that clients don't feel that if they get a flyer or they see something or hear something on the radio, they can verify that and see that the local authorities on board and promoting it as well. So I don't know of any other scheme that offers the free service across Cumbria, and the other unique bit about this is the draft proofing installation. So the offer of that, and that can include, I think I sort of moved over that slide quite quickly, but a whole range of features from the loft hatches, which are key to draft proofing a loft hatch. It's often the forgotten area of the house because it's up there, it's way away. It doesn't make your sort of feet cold so much when you're watching telly. But the loft hatches, obviously the hot air rises, it goes up there, but also moisture is going into the cold loft space as well, so it can lead to dampness issues. So installers, including Paul, can do a loft hatch draft proof, and that can include, you know, little clips that hold a loft hatch down as well, so to improve the seal on that loft hatch. But there's also chimney sheet. So if you've got an open flue, open fire, then the chimney sheep is a wool device, sheep's wool device that goes into the chimney when the fire is not in use. So for a lot of households, that's almost the whole year, or if not the whole year. But it's really easy to remove and then light a fire. And then there's the draft proofing of doors and windows, and a range of other measures. So that's all included in the scheme if there's a need for it.
Okay, lovely, thank you, Andrew. I've got another question coming from Tommy. Does the home retrofit planner service include thermal imaging?
It can. So it depends on the time of year, but and what the need is. But we can bring along the thermal camera and help illustrate some of the issues that might arise. But that's very weather dependent. If you want the full thermal imaging, with the photos as well as the home retrofit planner, then that just adds a little bit more to the cost. But yeah, certainly at this time of year, it can include some thermal imaging.
Thank you. We've got another question from Paul. The government says we need to retrofit millions of homes. So would you expect funding nationwide for schemes such as this? Presumably you mean the cold to cosy services, is that?
Certainly there's schemes. So the energy redress scheme that funds our cold to cosy homes service provides schemes, funding to schemes nationwide. And so there are similar schemes in other regions. And as well as that, the LEAP scheme, some regions have just the LEAP advice, but that's like without the draft proofing that we offer. So that's available. The LEAP service is available to people in Lancaster City District through Green Rose CIC. And so there are schemes like it nationwide, but clearly with so many homes to provide retrofitting, then funding for people to take up things like this, such as the energy audit and the home retrofit planner, certainly would be beneficial.
Okay,
It's just worth mentioning that ECO was really set up to do this large scale retrofitting work, but it isn't really, there isn't enough funding yet to genuinely bring all of the UK's homes up to the standards that will be required for us to get anywhere close to zero carbon. So it is a huge challenge, and we are just at the beginning of it, but you can't start with everyone. We need to start and build the supply chain and the skills and so on. So it is a sort of reasonable starting point, but a lot more needs to be done in the future.
Yeah.
Can I just thanks
Yep,
follow on just on the question that Paul asked about less. So that's the scheme in Lancaster, which currently does exist still on I think on a food sustainability arena, but not providing the energy service. But then since I mentioned just the Green Rose, so that's green, colour green, and then rose as in the rose, ROSE. So that's the scheme that provide the energy advice service in the Lancaster area, Lancaster Morecambe.
Thank you, Andrew. We've got a technical question, another one from Paul. And my problem with the hatch is it drops down, so it's difficult to put much insulation on it. Do you have any solutions for drop down loft hatches?
No, but look out for it because it can be quite dangerous for the experience of those ladders sliding down. I guess it's different clips or new clips. It gets a good firm attachment. But yeah, I'd certainly be careful adding any more weight of insulation to that loft hatch. But say you can get cut out and get a complete new eco loft hatch in there instead.
That way you're going to add, Tina?
I was just going to say that there are, for a price, you can buy some very fancy loft hatches. You can buy passive house suitable loft hatches. So they go from the very basics all the way up to the other end of the scale. It can be done. It just costs a lot of money.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Are there any more questions from anybody?
Just going back to loft hatches, I've actually seen a client that built out of spare pieces of Kingspan, like a room above the loft hatch. So you go up into the loft hatch and then there's another little sort of covering of all this spare Kingspan, and you open the door in that to enter the loft. It's possibly a use for Kingspan that when you've decided it's not suitable for your building.
Like a loft lobby.
Loft lobby, that's the word. Absolutely. Yeah. And of course the other more extreme thing to do is to not use a loft for storage and not go up there, and then actually seeing people take away the spare loft hatches to avoid the issues going up there, so actually sort of plastered over them.
Is there just a question on loft insulation? Is there a limit beyond which there's no point adding more insulation? Is there
Well, the
a limit?
government guideline is 270 millimeters, but the retrofit planner suggests going up to 400 millimeters.
Wow, that's deep.
And
Isn't it?
it's not just the case of topping up loft insulation, because if it is old loft insulation, then it will have pushed, like, slumped down a little bit. So there is a stage when it's worth just taking it all out and starting again.
And it's all about installing it properly and laying it properly rather than the kind of the amount in there.
And not squashing it, so not putting
Squashing.
things on top. And if you're boarding, then have raised board above the insulation.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? I'm just going to see, we've still got 22 people on the call. Any more for anybody else? We'll just give it another minute just to see whether there's any more questions. It's been great to see so many people involved, and I'm really pleased that we could help and answer some questions. No doubt there'll be other CAfS events coming up in the future, and do let us know if there are particular areas that you're interested in that you'd like us to help with advice on. Oh, we have another question from Kate. Do you have any advice on insulating dormer properties?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the biggest challenges is anything with anywhere with sloping ceilings, etc., and dormer windows, particularly the sides of the window, particularly tricky and very heat lossy. Any particular advice on that? Getting as much insulation in as you can, so stripping out the board and replacing insulation where you can is pretty key. What you see on thermal imaging, heat loss, much sort of cooler walls from the inside. So draft proofing also, if there's small walls, if you've got hatches into those little mini lofts, key there is to get in behind that wall and insulate it if it's not insulated, and insulating those doors into those little mini lofts and draft proofing those doors. Or yeah, we'll keep. I mean, ideally, screw those doors shut as well. So you're only really going in there to inspect for the loft space. You don't really, well, if you can avoid storing things in there, it's usually a good idea if you can.
Okay, great. We've got another 2 questions coming in. They're getting technical now. People are getting carried away. This question from Tommy, do radiator reflectors have much effect? What's the best material to use for this?
So we believe so. They have a great effect. They're not just reflecting heat back into the room, but they're reflecting it back into the radiator as well. So there's less heat loss from a radiator, and the heat isn't going out through the wall. Whether it's a solid wall, a cavity, a filled cavity, it's still worth doing. And we do include those. I didn't mention that in the Cold to Cozy Homes measures list, but that includes those panels. So they're like a metallized plastic type foil type thing, and they drop down and hold on with little clips. And I think Paul's probably fitted 1 or 2 in his time, as Tina and myself, when we've actually fitted measures ourselves as part of the Cold to Cozy visits. You can also get the type which is like polystyrene with metal foil on a roll, and they're really good because you can then stick those onto the wall with wallpaper paste, and that does a good job because they don't sort of fall forward to the radiator, and you can get them really nice and neat against the wall. They just take a little bit longer and it can be a bit messy, so we don't include that type on our scheme, but if you're doing it DIY, then that's consideration.
Thank you, Andrew. And one question from Dorothy. I'm still confused as to eligibility criteria and the various schemes. Who is the best person to talk to directly for thorough guidance?
I'll take that, shall I? All right. Well, it varies across Cumbria, and it is a bit complicated. So if you are, for example, in Eden, I would just say ring housing services at Eden District Council, because they have a scheme set up where they are helping people who will be eligible for the eco and for the Green Homes grant potentially, and they're actually helping them work out what's the best fit for the things they need for their home compared with the grants that are available. If you're not so fortunate as to be in Eden, then you need to do a little bit more of the legwork on your own. Home Life Carlisle in Carlisle is quite informative, and they can help you access some of these schemes. If you're just starting from scratch, then you can piece together by looking at the Simple Energy Advice website for the Green Homes grant. Look at all the things that are available there. You can ask your energy company about eco, so they can tell you about that scheme and whether you're eligible. If you're not eligible, it depends on whether the EcoFlex scheme in your area, if there is one, if that could help you. So there's no really simple way. I mean, we at CAfS offer a certain amount of energy advice, and so we can, if you call CAfS, if you have a call to Cozy Homes advice call, or if you call for our 10-minute general advice, we can potentially talk you through some of that. So that's another source of information that can help you, point you in the right direction.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Question from Paul: what type of cavity wall insulation is recommended?
The type that doesn't cause dampness issues in your wall. So bonded bead is the type that is often fitted nowadays. So it's much better than the older day, previously where mineral wool was blown in. The problem with mineral wool is it tends to slump down in the cavity over time, and the higher density then causes moisture problems to bridge across from the outer wall to the inner wall. Many problems with cavity wall insulation in Cumbria in exposed locations, and it is something that thermal imaging can help with, because you do see very clearly in some cases the heat loss in the top section of the wall, say about 20 centimeters quite often and more, and at least one client has had the cavity wall insulation removed as a result of the thermal imaging report being sent on to the installer. So that was removed under the guarantee. Tina, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to add to that really and say you don't even need to be in an exposed location, and building defects are quite commonly the cause. So in my house, I drilled a hole into the cavity and found wet insulation near to, quite low down. And that's just because of the way they built the house in the first place. It's coming in from ground level, and the cavity wall insulation is wet all along one side of the house. So it's not just an exposed locations, and it's you can have these problems in all sorts of different locations for all kinds of different reasons. And yeah, wet walls are keep the heat in less well than dry walls. Dry wall without insulation is still better than a wet wall, so it really is worthwhile sorting out these kind of issues and then considering insulating it with something more suitable afterwards.
Having said that, go on.
I was just going to ask Tina a question based on that. How much of a job is it to remove wet insulation once you realise it's a problem without kind of knocking down your wall or seriously damaging your wall?
The companies that do the installation, some of them also extract. So they come in with a huge machine to install cavity wall insulation. It's like a massive vacuum cleaner in reverse, basically to get the wet stuff out. Again, it's the same kind of,
suck it out.
You suck it out. It's like a massive vacuum cleaner. And whether they get it all out, how effective that is, I don't actually know. But it's a fair job, but it's not an impossible job. You don't have to take the walls down, so it should be doable.
Yeah, and that's with the bonded bead as well. That can be removed, even though it's sort of bonded solid in the wall. There's some sort of cutter device that goes in, I was told, that goes and chops it up, and then it can actually into the cavity and then can be sucked out. So I'm told.
Sounds vicious.
What I was going to say was let's not forget our walls will need to be insulated. Most walls, where we can, we need to insulate them to tackle this and reduce our carbon emissions. So in many cases, cavity wall insulation is successful. I mean, there's rows of houses where I live where they've all been retrofitted and hasn't been great problems, and that's a fairly exposed location. One of the key things is that if the house is, I mean here it's block as a block wall, and then there's a concrete outer that's painted, so you can maintain the paint work and keep the moisture out, and so the people who keep painting the house, you know, solve the problem. They've got warm walls and a tidier looking wall as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Tina, do you have something to
I
add?
was just going to say something else, which is a number of years ago in the Boardman report, they did actually point out that by 2030, the chances are to meet our carbon emissions, we would have to internally or externally insulate walls that already have cavity wall insulation. So over the long term, these cavity wall insulated walls are not going to be sufficiently well insulated for you know, for the future requirements, and it is anticipated that we will all be adding extra insulation at some point to normal cavity wall insulated homes that have been built in the last 50 or so years.
Yes, Paul?
Mm-hmm.
Just to go back to Andrew's comment about the cavity wall, one of the things we've been talking about at Warmer Homes is the vital necessity for building maintenance. And one thing is to make sure your gutters are in good condition and your downpipes are in good condition, so that you're not getting any extra water onto those walls, and you're keeping things as, you know, as straight as possible. As again, you know, the water running down the walls from a leaking gutter is just trouble building up.
Yep.
Thank you, Paul. We haven't had any questions for a while, so I think we're probably drawing to a close and attendees are leaving. So we have 1 more minute, last chance for questions from anybody.
If I can mention, Tina mentioned the 10-minute advice call. So absolutely, and that's included in the Cold to Cozy Home service. If you've just got a quick question in the way you're asking one now, that's the sort of thing you can ring us up as well, and we can provide that advice by the phone, and then you can take up the full Cold to Cozy Homes if you're eligible or want to take that up. Also, for those people who don't want to take up the thermal imaging survey or the home retrofit planner, then if you're not eligible for Cold to Cozy Homes, we can provide the same service as Cold to Cozy Homes and quote for that. I'll give you a price for that, and then you can follow up and get the draft proofing as well. And again, we'd provide you a price for that service. So that Cold to Cozy Homes is in effect available for everybody company-wide. So it's worth getting in touch to find out more.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Just one last reminder from me then, if you wouldn't mind, those who are still with us, fill in the feedback form. I'll put the link in the chat. That would be fantastic. And I think we're probably going to finish there. There haven't been any more questions and people are leaving. So thank you very much for everyone who stayed to the end. Very impressed by your perseverance through to the last of the questions. That's fantastic. And yes, that's it from us. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evenings.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.